All right, see, verify you can see my screen.
Yes, but it's looking like there's two different screens at the same time. So I don't know if you're in full present mode right now.
I am.
Okay.
What's that here? Got something different. There's ultra wide monitors. Sometimes that's not a good thing for sharing.
Yeah, take your time.
Any better?
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. So I'll get us started then. First off, thanks for being here. I'm Travis Howerton. I'm the co-founder and chief technology officer at RegScale. I spent around 22 years in the U.S. nuclear weapons program, where I sort of started at Y-12, came up through the ranks there, became the first chief technology officer for the nuclear weapons program across the 8 national labs and plants, did a lot of digital transformation work in the early days of cloud and mobility, sort of between 2019, 2013 or so. Went to Oak Ridge National Lab as their deputy CIO, then came back with Bechtel Corporation at Consolidated Nuclear Security to lead the merger and transformation program across Y-12 Pantex, where we were on the hook for basically digitally transforming the site and trying to save around $3 billion over 10 years in cost savings through applying technology and efficiencies and merging operations. So spent a little over 20 years doing digital transformation work in areas that are not super receptive to being transformed in government, developed some lessons learned and frameworks along the way. And so based off that, I've got sort of this standard talk I give on how to do digital transformation. Whether you're in government or highly regulated industry, a lot of the challenges are the same. And so nothing sales pitchy in here today about RegScale or anything else. This is more just best practices, lessons learned, and sort of an overall framework of thinking about digital transformation that hopefully people can apply in their day jobs in a way that helps them sort of move the needle for their organization. And so we'll go through a couple of things. We'll start with sort of what is it and why should you care? A lot of buzzwords around digital transformation. I'll talk through sort of how I think about it and how we think about it as a company. Some of the drivers for the needs to do it, the things that make it hard, and then again, that framework that'll help you think through it in a repeatable, consistent way. And there's sort of 2 areas where I think digital transformation really applies. And I've spent most of my career in the first one, which is more on the technical debt side, where you've got older technologies in place, you've got an existing business, you've had business processes and practices in place for decades in most cases, but you know your competition either is doing something different. You've got technical debt, it's costing more and more money to keep this stuff running. You're under pressure to reduce your budgets, and it's hard with the stuff you have. And so you need to digitally transform to overcome that. And then the other side that I'm participating in more recently and that we're doing now is more in the startup world. It's more the greenfield visionary stuff where you're going to reimagine something from the start in a way that is transformative and fundamentally different than people are trying to do it today. So we sort of see 2 lenses there. Sort of the processes in some cases are a little different, and I'll talk through that. And then you've got the week. Those are our definitions, my definitions. Wikipedia is more digital transformation is the adoption of digital technology to transform services or businesses through replacing non-digital or manual processes with digital processes or replacing older tech with newer tech. And so fits pretty nicely with theirs, but I kind of see it in 2 lenses when we think through it. The other thing I highly recommend if you're thinking about digital transformation, this is something that may be interesting to you, something you're being pushed to do at work, is check out Tom Friedman's book, The Age of Accelerations. He's got a quote in there that I love, which And the fundamental premise of the book is that in the age of computing, things are moving in exponentials. Computing power is doubling about every 2 years or so. And he said, humans don't think well in exponentials. And so we've entered this age of acceleration where the world's never moved this fast before, but it'll also be true that it'll never be this slow again. And so if you're having trouble keeping up now, the premise of the book is you'll never be able to keep up in the future. So things have to change. The way we think about things has to change. Otherwise, the machines will be so far ahead of the humans that divide becomes unbridgeable. And because it's moving so fast, when you talk to, these are Gartner numbers, not mine, but basically 87% now say that digital transformation is a top business priority. So everybody knows they need to do this. Most people, 80% almost, believe they won't exist commercially anymore if they don't do it. So it's almost a business imperative that they do it. And so the upside is everybody knows it's important. There's not a whole lot of debate on whether technology is going to be an important thing we need to embrace going forward. The real challenge is why we're so terrible at it. Because 76% of companies say they've made less than 50% progress against their goals in this space. So they're not getting to where they need to be, and they know if they don't get there, they're going to die. Only 70% are doing better than 50%, 6% above 75%. And so if you were doing well at this, you were the exception to the rule. It's really hard. And there's a whole lot of reasons why it's hard that we're going to talk to it now. And so the fundamental question we ask is, if you're not going to exist if you don't do it, if it's really important, if it's a top priority for the business you do, why is almost nobody being successful at it? And sort of we've run into sort of a consistent set of things that get people in trouble. One is cognitive dissonance. You just believe this can't happen to me. And you especially see this a lot in government. And you think through like a program like NASA that's going to put somebody on the moon, you think inherently governmental. We're never going to have any competition. Like this sort of stuff doesn't apply to me. And you talk to some government audiences and they turn off when they hear that. They're like, that's not going to happen. That's not a real problem for me. Then you see SpaceX talking about putting people on Mars and even colonizing Mars. So things that were clearly only in the range of government several decades ago. Now multiple private companies are looking to do this pretty consistently. So the story for everybody is nobody's too big to disrupt. Pretty much everything's going to get touched. Also, you get a lot of employee pushback and cultural problems. So the bigger you are, sort of the harder it is to steer the Titanic. People are very comfortable with what they've done for 20, 30 years. They know how to do it. They can pass audits. They're, in a lot of cases in government, they're not going to pay you more to go do this. And it seems really hard and a lot of work. And so there's not a lot of great incentives. They may lack the expertise. Some of these things that are transforming AI and ML didn't even exist 2 years ago. So you're constantly having to be more on the bleeding edge, which is an area government historically is not that great at. So it's pushing everybody to learn in faster cycles than maybe they're traditionally comfortable doing. The other thing we run into a lot in government is it's hard to get a decision made. Elections cause people to change, chairs change. There's been a lot of brain drain as sort of an aging workforce has exited. And so it can be very hard in government to get the right decision made to do something big and different. It may be risky. You can get in trouble and tank your career for making big risks, but nobody tends to get in trouble for doing the same thing. So again, sort of weaker incentives. A lot of times there's just lack of vision and strategy. People aren't thinking big enough about what's possible. They're sort of limiting themselves around the art of the possible. And then again, in government, the other thing is it's hard to transform and digitize when you can't ever get a budget until half the year's gone. Makes it really hard to execute against your plan, even if you have one. And then the reality is most people realize it too late, that they needed to do this. By the time you've accepted it, you've budgeted it, somebody else is already really far down the road on this, and it's too late and you can't catch up. If you want sort of some data points on this, I thought this was a super interesting slide. And so if you think about it, when you got into one of the top 20 companies in the world, you used to have a 30 to 50 year run. It creates natural moats. It's hard to disrupt you. You're going to be around for a while. That's no longer the case. In just 20 years, if you look at the top 10 companies in the world, only 2 are still on the list. Huge swap out. General Motors, nowhere near the top 10. Everybody talks about Tesla today and sort of the next generation of cars. Obviously, Walmart still around and doing well, along with Exxon and AT&T. But Ford, General Electric, the big American car companies have been disrupted. IBM, no longer one of the big boys or top big boys in technology. Citigroup's dropped out. Philip Morris, nobody thinks of them as a top 10 sort of company. And so even the biggest of the big are going to get disrupted. Nobody's safe. And these cycle times from being a mega corporation or entity to a disrupted and displaced one are happening much, much faster, 3-4 times faster. And in the age of accelerations, that's going to continue to compress going forward. And so my favorite quote, just to sort of set the stage for digital transformation talk, is a lot of this isn't going to make you popular to talk about at work. And so Steve Jobs' quote was, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs and the square holes. They're the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. But the only thing you can't do is ignore them because they change things. They push the human race forward. So while some may see them as crazy, we see genius, because the ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones that actually do." And so love that quote, because everything's impossible until somebody does it. Putting someone on the moon was impossible until the US and NASA did it. The idea of having a supercomputer in your hand that could look up all the information in the world was impossible until Google and Apple made it happen. And so this is sort of a talk for how do you embrace that need to change things and move forward. And so this is our 5-part digital transformation strategy, sort of how we think through things. One is you've got to have an innovation strategy. You're not going to get there with serendipity. There's a really good model we'll talk through there. The way government thinks about project management doesn't work for actually doing this kind of work, and we'll talk through why. There's some things you've got to do differently with people that are fundamental to getting everything done. That we're going to talk through that piece. There's also a risk and compliance side of this that makes things difficult in highly regulated industries, especially in government. And then the last piece that's really hard, actually, I would say it's the easiest of all of them, is automation. Of how do you apply actual technology to get the benefit you're looking for in digital transformation, is actually the easiest piece if you can conquer the other 4. The innovation strategy, I had the privilege of listening to Dr. Gary Pisano. He's from Harvard Business School. He laid out sort of a roadmap and thesis for how he thinks about companies having a digital transformation strategy. I got to hear him talk when I was with Bechtel. I thought this was the most innovative way of thinking through transformation that I'd heard, because not all transformation is the same. There's buckets of transformation. And so he basically put it along an X and Y axis, with the Y axis being, is this a new business model, or is this something we already know how to do with our existing business model? And then on the X axis, is this a new technical competency, or is this something we already know how to do? And if you think about it in those buckets, no part of this quad chart is inherently better than any other part of this quad chart. They're all important, but his talk was you should really be making bets in all of them, and looking at what are some things where we could test new business models, where could we test new technology, where can we try to hit a home run, have a black swan change the world event, with an architectural style change. And so there's different pieces here to give you some real world examples of what you might see here in the bottom left. This is where 90% of the innovation happens in government, I think, and in most large companies. They're not really much different than government. You're making incremental tweaks. It's not fundamentally new tech. It's not fundamentally a new business model. You're just lean out. You're following Lean Six Sigma value principles to try to lean out business processes, eliminate waste, make something a little more efficient here or there. But fundamentally, you're not selling anything in a fundamentally different way. You're not, it doesn't require brand new technology. That's where a lot of the world works. That's where you ought to have a business case, be able to explain why you're doing it, the goals. These other three areas are a lot harder for MBA types because it's hard to do a business case because you have at least one, maybe two major unknowns. And so out here is like, so let's think of a new business model. This is where a lot of innovation is happening in the everything as a service world. Uber is a great example of this. Same cars, there's no new tech here. We've had GIS systems and nav systems forever. No new tech, just a different way of delivering a business model. You know, when I grew up, it was, you know, don't get into cars with strangers. Don't talk to strangers on the internet. Now we order a stranger on the internet to get into a car with. That's sort of the fundamental business model change. Took a huge leap of faith that people would embrace this. Nothing changed, billion-dollar industry just by changing the business model. So coming up with a better way to market, sell, and wrap service around existing technology. When I think about new tech, like the iPhone's a great example of that, where you look at it's brand new technology, the advances they had to make in cell phone towers, bandwidth, batteries to make that last, radical technical innovation. That's an area more engineering focused. You don't know if people will want this product, but you're still selling it through the same channels. You're still going to retail stores, you're ordering it online. There's no business model change per se, but just breakthrough technology. And then when you go look at what Google did, it was both. These are the architectural kind of things that changed the world. So one is they built brand new technology that could basically index and make searchable all the information in the world in an intuitive and highly effective way. So crazy breakthrough technology. And then they said, hey, we're going to change the business model. We've built one of the most valuable services in the history of the world, and we're going to give it away for free. Completely new business model. They learned how to sell ads around it. Obviously, it's not a purely altruistic business, but completely different business model for how they attacked it. Breakthrough technology, architectural sort of societal shift. If you think about sort of how do you apply this to a company, there's sort of two things I wanted to walk through. One is sort of how another company might do it, and then how I've thought about it in a past job I was at. And so if you think about Mercedes, they're doing a really good job at this, in my view. Every year they put out new incremental changes, right? You might go get a new Mercedes E-Class 2021 and 2022. There's some incremental changes to that. Things got a little bit better, a little more efficient, whatever it may be, but it's still largely the same E-Class. It's not fundamentally different in how they're selling it or the technology, and it's sort of incremental improvements. When you think about their business model disruption, they have a basically Mercedes collection service where you pay a monthly fee and you can go pick out the Mercedes you want to drive and swap cars out. It's the same cars. There's nothing different in the fleet of what they're doing. They're trying to test, will people pay extra essentially to be able to drive the Mercedes they want? Maybe I want a sports car today for a road trip with me and my wife. but then we're going to take the family to the beach. So let's go grab an SUV. Will people pay extra to have that flexibility in the fleet to be able to grab the car you want when you want it? On the radical side, you see their concept cars, hydrogen powered, electric powered, innovations in engineering. They're going to sell it at the same lots, the same way, the same financing, business model, nothing changes, just completely different technology inside them that they think may disrupt the market, create new markets. And then when you think through the architectural side, that's when you get into autonomous vehicles. So now maybe people don't buy cars at all. Everything's as a service, car drives itself. The layouts of the cars change. They become like mobile offices that you can sit in, work, move you from place to place. But a societal type change has to happen. You got to figure out how you price it right. You've got to figure out the technology to make it safe. You've got to overcome regulatory hurdles. But it's an architectural societal shift that the big car makers are working on in the autonomous space. So this is a good example of just one company and how they might think through an innovation strategy in the 4 quadrants. I mentioned I was with Bechtel in a past life. I got to lead the Consolidated Nuclear Security Merger and Transformation Organization. And sort of we had our own innovation strategy. You have to think through. We had a performance excellence group that was doing Lean Six Sigma, exactly what you saw 2 slides ago. Go out, look at a process, lean it out, make it more efficient. Most of our savings were coming over there, and they should. You can put a business case around them. You can put engineers on it. We know how to do it. Also, as part of that contract, the government awarded a cost savings contract, meaning that on the Bechtel side, we could participate in the savings we generated if we could validate to the government, we took some initiative, we saved you money, and we gave it back to you. Part of that could go to our fee. So it was an innovative contract structure that incentivized us at Bechtel to go save the government money. And we'd saved hundreds of millions of dollars doing that. There was no new technology. It's literally just a different business model than what they'd done traditionally under FAR-based contracting, where it was cost plus performance fee, where you get a report card that then dictates what your fee structure is and your profit on that contract with the government. So again, no new technology happened there, completely a business model change in how the government contracted and how we had to deliver. On the technology front, we were trying to combine 2 sites, in this case, Pantex and Y12, put them into one new company. And to do that, we reimagined the technology fundamentally. We used SAP HANA. We replaced 2 legacy ERPs, put them in a new system of record, got out of needing all the warehousing, but huge technological leap forward. The business really didn't change. There was no requirement to change the business to make this one happen per se. It was more like a big technology push forward, microwave technology for sort of melting metals versus traditional processes was another one. But several areas where technology was being pushed. And then the radical architectural change is we were rebuilding the site from the ground up into what we call the uranium processing facility. How we were going to do operations fundamentally going to change. So the business model was going to change of how operations run, what you need to do to protect special nuclear material. Huge change, amazing amounts of technology going into there that we can't talk about, but just a complete reimagining of nuclear operations at the Y12 site for the next 50 years. So architectural change, literal skyline change in Oak Ridge. But that's an example of how a government contract can think through this innovation strategy in those 4 buckets. I'm a big viewer that everybody can come up with something they can put in the 4 buckets. You may not have a Google level change society business model, but you can fundamentally change your company's outlook, your market share, your citizen-based services in the government by thinking through that approach. The next area that we talk to a lot is the government's approach to project management. The bigger you get, it's not just government. We see this in energy sector, anywhere that's huge and big, you end up with a lot of management. Management wants to measure things. One of the easiest things to measure is project performance. And so nobody wants to show red on their report card for a project. And so I got some advice. I didn't put it from the person it was, but when I started out in government, former Fed in the weapons program, I was told, if you want to do a project, figure out what you think it takes to get it done, double it and add 50%. Because it's going to be harder than you think in government. A lot of stuff's going to go wrong, and you really don't want to show red on a project report card that goes up to headquarters, because you will get the eye of Mordor upon you. And so the big organizations tend to plan to the worst case. And if you can beat the worst case by a little bit, you're a hero. The reality is, if you plan to the best case, realizing you're not going to be perfect, but maybe I missed it by 20%, I'm a villain because I just showed up red on a report card that was arbitrary to begin with. And so you end up with this massive amount of value loss between the padding that happens to be a hero and the pain of being a villain that makes everything cost more than it needs to. And make everything feel riskier than it needs to. And sort of becomes a high stress world over there that makes it hard to do business in government. And so we're big believers in Agile, which is good when there are unknowns. So waterfall projects make a ton of sense when you are in that bottom left quadrant. When you kind of know what's happening, you can plan it out, but they are horrible if you're going to try to do something in the other three, where you're trying to precisely plan something you don't understand at all yet. And so I'm a big believer in sort of the lean startup methodology, and that all large businesses need to learn how to think more like startups for digital transformation. And what that really means is just assume you know nothing, create a hypothesis around that business model or that technology and test it, validate it, tweak it, worry less about absolute projects and hitting dates, and learn more about learning, making sure this is something you really need to do. And you may find out that this was a horrible idea and you have an opportunity to kill it when it's cheap, or you may find out that there's a much better idea than you thought going into it now that you've done some learning, and that this really needs to be a much bigger project because the value and the return is much greater than anyone anticipated. So we like Agile when there's a lot of unknowns. Waterfall, when you've done it before, on the waterfall side, like I mentioned, you're just trying to stay on schedule. On Agile, you should be trying to figure out how to go faster. What's the quickest way we could learn? In waterfall, if you want to change something, there's a lot of pain and approvals. In Agile, you should embrace it. What did we learn? Can we pivot and do something different? Should we just kill this thing altogether? Waterfall forces you to plan early on something you don't understand at all. Whereas in Agile, it forces you to learn early so that you can plan once you understand, which makes sense in those other three buckets. And instead of getting the work done, you want to focus on the process for getting the work done in Agile. So the process is more important to the long term, and you're really trying to focus on maximizing business value going forward versus staying on budget and staying in scope. So fundamental differences in how projects need to be done if you want to play in those other three quadrants. The next area that I talk to folks a lot about is there has to be a focus on people, because nothing big and important gets done without bringing people with you. And if we were in a different environment where we could have a workshop for this, I'd bring out an easel. I'd ask, what do you want your perfect workplace to look like? If we got a whole group of executives from around ATART, they'd probably say, I want to work somewhere that's merit-based, where I have psychological safety, where I feel empowered, where I've got a compassionate boss who respects me, where I get opportunities, where it's relaxed, where it's value-based, where I have flexibility to work on things I'm passionate about, where I get kudos and positive reinforcement. where I've got work-life balance and where we're all about doing the best thing possible for the company. You get that same answer in any group of executives you work with. They all say the same things. And then the question I always ask is, if that's the culture you want, why don't you have it? Because these are the executives who run the organization. It's literally within your power to make this happen, yet you don't have it. And so I kind of describe it like, being a chubby middle-aged man now in my 40s. It's like somebody told me that ice cream is the ultimate weight loss solution. Ice cream's my favorite thing in the world, and there's no ice cream shops to be found anywhere. It just makes no sense. And so you got to ask yourself, if this is what we all want, if we're the people that can make it happen, why don't we have it? And the reason we don't have it is it's hard. Large business, you'll find a lot of this in startups, but you won't find it in large businesses. And the reason you don't find it, it's not because startups are smarter or anything else. It's large businesses tend to end up with bell curves to make things fair because they're worried about getting sued. It's hard to have a merit-based organization with a bell curve because it's not based off relative performance. You may have 80% of your folks who are absolutely killing it, but you can only give raises and bonuses to 20% of them, right? So it's not as results oriented as it needs to do. They tend to do minor raises versus major raises and bonuses and stock options that really incent you to move to help grow the business because you're directly benefiting from it. Large businesses don't want to get sued. So at some point you end up risk averse. And so it becomes less about the results and more about reducing risk. You end up in 9-to-5 office culture versus the get it done anytime. You have to accrue vacation. Lots of startups have moved to unlimited vacation because they realize work's a roller coaster. Some weeks it's 60, 70 hours. Then you need time off to sort of recharge. There's a lot more focus on degrees and ladders and bucketing people into groups. Whereas in startups, it's more, what can you actually do? Because you can't afford people who can't do their job. Whereas when I was at CNS or anywhere in government, you can always hire more people. There's a lot of money in these billion-dollar agencies. So if Bob can't get it done, I can hire Bob plus one. And a startup, if Bob can't get it done, we may go under, right? So it's very different. And then another big one is you've got to be willing to deal with non-performance. So if someone's not cutting it, you can't put them on a plan and spend years documenting to make sure you don't get sued. You've got to make sure you're always focused on people who can perform, because as soon as people realize there's folks in the group that aren't doing their job and nobody's holding them accountable, everybody else quits trying as hard. So it's a cancer in the organization. So culture problems, in my view, are largely a function of being unwilling to do the hard, unpleasant things that may add risk to get that culture. It's much easier to sort of look the other way on those things or continue what you're doing. So if you want a high performing culture, you've got to have a high performing management team that drives that culture. Just sort of a good segue into that risk aversion compliance, because companies get this way and organizations get this way because they all start out being new and innovative, solving a problem. They solve it really well, so they grow. Now they start to have assets. Because they have assets, people want them. Competition moves in, people start suing them because there's actual money there. And it starts to, over time, we got to have a process for this. We've got to follow the process. We need a lot of attorneys. We're going to worry about risk. And before you know it, the process of doing the work becomes more important than the actual work. And sort of you lose that focus on performance. And what happens as a function of time and audits and corrective actions you take to prevent those bad audits is that compliance becomes the equal and opposite force to digital transformation. You want to go fast, but there's always somebody who will say, well, have you filled out this paperwork? Have you done this environmental study? Have you analyzed these risks? Have you thought about the records management requirements? Like, anyone sits around on Saturday night and thinks about records management requirements. The they're all people who are trying to do the right thing and add value, but they help you in ways that are completely unhelpful. They slow things down, they make it hard. Our entire company, we've built around shifting compliance. Our view is that compliance has become the new long pole in the tent. When you could spin anything up in the cloud in seconds, but it still takes months to get your paperwork approved, you're actually not saving any time from an overall value perspective or a lean value perspective. And so we're big. I'm not going to give a sales pitch on RegScale, but our whole value proposition is trying to digitize, automate, transform, and scale to allow compliance to move at the speed of business so that the paperwork doesn't slow you down. And so whether you want to talk to RegScale or any other company that's doing something in this space, you've got to think through how you're going to get through the compliance wickets in a timely manner if you want to digitally transform in a reasonable amount of time. The last piece before sort of I'll open it up to questions is that the easiest part is automation, and that there's this intersection of things that are happening. Starting with cloud computing, it's become a commodity. You can spin up any kind of infrastructure you need on demand. It's available in seconds or minutes. You don't need the long procurement cycles. It allows anyone to innovate with speed. Also, mobility, it's allowing people to connect from anywhere on any device. So the opportunity to offer sort of value-added citizen services is at an all-time high. You see a big push in the Biden administration, the current administration, around citizen-facing services. It's this intersection of things that make that possible. Robotic process automation is something we're also a big believer in. A lot of these legacy technologies are hard to move overnight into the future, but you can do things with RPA and robots to move data around where maybe you don't need quite as many people, or you can do it faster with machines that provide a better service to citizens than you could provide to date. AI and ML, everybody should be running pilots and projects to figure out what they can do with this technology that provides value to their organization. The tools are getting easier and easier to use. The capability in the workforce is coming up. So it's the access to workforce is getting better. It's still hard, but it's getting better. Data analytics, this idea of pulling data from multiple places, fusing, learning, decision support systems, I think is a huge area that's ripe for government. And then we have folks that I think should be taking a hard look at low code, no code. A lot of my experience in government, our applications where we need to fill out a form, we need to put it through a workflow, we need to run reports on it, we need to send out emails and alerts around stuff. That's target rich environment for modern low code, no code, reduce the cost, improve the user experience, take this huge backlog I've had in every CIO job in my life and be able to rip through a lot of it really fast. There's a great opportunity to use these tools at whichever one you pick, whichever one makes sense for you. There's a lot of technology in that space that's fantastic. The other thing that I like to finish with is that even though automation is the easy part, people still screw it up. And one of the ways we screw it up is we automate stupid. And so in almost every staff meeting I've had with teams over years, I'll always say automating stupid is not an accomplishment. You should start with, why are we doing this? What's the best way to provide a service? Really think through that and then decide which bucket it falls into. Is this a commodity service? Meaning it's not differentiated for us. It's not core to our mission. It's not unique to what we do and the value we provide citizens and taxpayers. If it's a commodity service, you should just buy it. Lean out that process. Try to look for something either commercial you can buy to do it, or a low code, no code type thing. Leverage industry best practices. Don't reinvent the wheel. Try to get it as a service and focus on pulling cost out. Because if it's commodity, well, who cares? Just try to get the cheapest thing that works the best and most reliably for you, which frees up money for the things that are truly differentiated. And I'm not a believer that all custom code is bad. Custom code's a good thing when you apply it to a differentiated service that is core to what you're trying to accomplish. You shouldn't have to compromise and use a commodity service that only does 70% of what you actually need it to. If it truly is core, spend the money to get a system that does exactly what you need in exactly the way you expect it to work. This is an area where you want to invest, where customization is actually maybe a good thing. Because if that customization is directly tied to customer value, then customization and that cost can be a good thing. And it can impact how people interact with your services. And so the conclusion, just to sort of wrap us up here, is, innovation is a team sport. It's inevitable. You're going to need to get your whole team on board with it. You've got to have a strategy for what you're doing. You're going to have to think differently about how you do it to get it done. And that the more large organizations learn to start thinking like small organizations, the better they will be at this. And so being large gives you lots of advantages. You have more money, you have a larger, more skilled workforce. There's many things that you have advantages on. If you can start to apply some of these principles to your operations, you can unlock additional business value for the taxpayer and for your stakeholders. And with that, I am happy to pause and take any questions or comments from the group.
Thank you, Travis. That was really great presentation.
Thank you.
Mhm. Alexa, what are some of your thoughts around the presentation that we just saw?
Well, first of all, I have to say I really appreciated his Lord of the Rings quotes, the Eye of Mordor and whatnot. I agree with him on that, especially in government contracting. And I think I just Metaface has a couple of digital transformation contracts. The government loves buzzwords, whether it's Web3 or blockchain or ledger technology, whatever it is, NFTs, they just get super excited about those things. But I feel like before the government tries to embark on any sort of digital transformation, they should get their house in order first. So the new legislation that's coming down saying that they have to understand the legacy systems they have in place and have a plan for those before embarking on all this new exciting stuff, I think would be a good thing to sort of go back to the drawing board SIPC style and get that TBM stuff figured out before buying new fancy fun tools. That's just my opinion, but I really appreciated, first of all, Southern accent, super fun quotes, and it was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Agreed. And Eric Choi, I know you joined us a little late, but it's good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Hi.
Hi. Ian, how about you? What are some of your thoughts around the presentation? Ian's being quiet today.
I put Ian to sleep.
No, you might be having audio trouble. Well, Travis, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I know the rest of our missionary group will, and I'm going to send them the recording out in an email for anyone who wasn't able to make this time. I think I might have confused everyone by mentioning we were going to move it last week, but it'll be up on YouTube and I'll share it with you once it's up, and then we can post it on LinkedIn as well.
All right, sounds great. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. If there's any questions or follow-up, you can reach me on my email at the end of that presentation. It's thowerton@regscale.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Always enjoy interacting with fellow people who have a passion for digital transformation. So if I can ever be of service to you, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.